Is a trip to the Citrus Bowl on the line when Tennessee plays Missouri on Saturday in Columbia? And if it is, does anyone really care? Or will Tennessee fans be fine with just about any Florida Bowl game that they wind up in? Welcome into the Volunteer State. I'm Blake Toppmeyer alongside the Knoxville News Sentinels, Adam Sparks and John Adams. Big game ahead this weekend for the Vols against Mizzou, a ranked matchup, a game that will probably determine second place in the SEC East, although the East champion is still not decided. Georgia has not sealed that. Before we look ahead, though, guys, I want to go backward and not break down the nuts and bolts of the UConn game because it was the blowout that we expected it to be. But the narrative that I think a lot of fans were interested in was what would Nico do? Hadn't seen much of the freshman quarterback this season. We thought we would see him in this one. Saw him a couple drives, had a touchdown drive. I think some fans had hoped that they'd see more of him. And yet, given the sample size that we got, what did you guys think?
I was pretty impressed. I mean, I can take this in two different directions: Nico in the present and Nico in the future. Nico in the present, I wasn't sure if he would be a good enough backup to win games. If Joe Milton were to get injured in these games left over, would Nico be up to the task of coming in and being a good backup, similar to how Joe Milton was for Hendon Hooker last year? I think he is, and based on this game, he early in the year, if you look at from spring to fall practice, you saw a little bit of a step development from fall practice to the times that we saw him play a little bit early in the year. He had maybe a little bit of a step, but I think this was the most sizable step that I've seen for Nico in each stage that we've seen him in since he got onto campus. So in the present, I saw what he did against UConn and said, okay, yeah, if Tennessee's in a close game, and Nico comes in, he can run the offense and they can function with him back there. It wouldn't be an enormous drop off between Milton to Nico. In the future, it's not like that I thought Nico was a bust. I thought Nico would probably develop into a really good SEC quarterback, but I wasn't sure if he could be anywhere close to that next season. After seeing the UConn game, I think he probably can be. Again, the steps that he took throughout this process, these different stages, I thought he made the biggest strides between his last time we saw him play, like a month or so ago, until now. He moved around in the pocket well. His poise, his instincts were good. Early in fall camp practices that we saw, he would overthrow a lot of guys. He overthrew one this time as D. Williams, was somewhat understandable. But he was very accurate. He was poised. I thought his timing was good. If you look at the touchdown he threw to McAllen Castles, faked a quarterback draw, stepped back, threw it. We can see his arm strength. We can see him run. He had a 25-yard run. I just saw all the talent that we knew he had starting to show itself on a college football level. So I think based on his trajectory, I think he's going to be a pretty good quarterback next year. I think it's going to come sooner than later based on what I saw in the UConn game.
Yeah, I was kind of the same way. Everything I'd heard about him, that pretty much was live at Neyland Stadium this Saturday. Really impressed me on that 25-yard run, even though he lost his footing and fell down. But the way he moved to be 6'6", when he was running, he didn't look like a 6'6" player. He's obviously very tall, but just the way he moved, very fluid movement. And that's one of the things that struck me. Also, the zip on his passes, a nice release. I'm not an expert on throwing mechanics. Adam is a former high school quarterback. He can break all that stuff down for you sometimes if you want. But, yeah, everything I saw about him, I mean, I think the guy's going to be a terrific player. He just and again, Adam mentioned the instincts. I think that a lot of quarterbacks are good runners, But a big part of that too is knowing when and where to run. And I know we just saw a very limited sample. I'm thinking mainly about that 25-yard run, but I just think he has those football instincts. And maybe that's because I want to believe he does after all I've heard, but I was just really impressed.
Yeah, and UConn obviously didn't put up much resistance at any stage of this game. Pretty weak opponent, and it's still the Joe show. We don't want to insinuate otherwise. Milton, he was 11 of 14, 254 yards. Good day for him. Good day for that ground game, which still drives the bus of this offense led by Jalen Wright. But I think this was, to Adam's point, kind of about the future and getting a glimpse at is Nico going to be ready to hit the ground running and to be Tennessee's starter next year, to Tennessee have lofty expectations, all that type of thing. This was an encouraging sign for that. And yet, I guess the disappointment, maybe from a fan perspective, was they only got to see him play 2 drives. Do you think that was a mistake by Josh Heupel, or is that just something that, yeah, fans would like to see him more, but you got to, you start with Milton, then you go to Nico, and then they went to third stringer Gaston Moore. Is that kind of I guess, a nothing burger, guys, or do you think, Heupel should have got a little more time for Nico in this one?
It was 100% predictable. I had a UT fan text me before the game and asked, "Hey, do you think we'll see Nico from like the mid-second quarter till late fourth quarter, or early third quarter till the end of the game?" And my answer to him was, "You're going to see Nico in the third quarter, and then he's going to get 2 drives." This is literally what I texted him. He's going to get 2 drives, and Gaston Moore's going to get a drive, then Navy Schuler's going to get a drive. And that's pretty close to what it ended up being. Josh Heupel has done this before. When he gets in these games where he's winning by 50, 60 points, he only gets a couple of these a year, a couple of them, only one of them this year. He wants to let Gaston Moore, who he has an affinity for, who works hard, who has served as their backup at times, even though he's a walk-on. He wants to get him a little bit of time. And Navy Schuler is a legacy. I mean, if at the game, that last drive when Navy Schuler was in, they showed Heath Schuler on the sideline. They showed him up on the Jumbotron, and everybody, applauded that. Hey, Heath is watching his son play, and he's wearing number 21 and running the ball, like Heath used to run the ball in a similar way. And everybody liked that. He wanted those guys to play. And if they didn't play in this game, they were not going to get snaps. Navy Schuler would not get a snap all season, and that was important to him. The other side of that, too, is Nico is still their backup. Now, why we want to see him more now, and I wanted to see him just for see more of Nico, but need him against Missouri, Georgia bowl game, and he's out because he was injured in the fourth quarter against UConn. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we saw enough of him that we saw what we're getting, and Josh Heupel wanted the other guys to play. Is completely predictable.
Yeah, I don't see why anybody would complain too much about that. I think the most important thing was for Nico to come in the game and show, as Adam said, he can run the offense. That you're not going to fall off the cliff with your backup quarterback when he comes into the games. And think about through all the years, I mean, you see guys come in, a backup comes in for the starter, and he just looks ill-equipped. He looks as though he doesn't belong. And to me, that was the main takeaway. Nico came in the game, and he looked as though he belonged. I know it was just against Connecticut, but I think if he'd have come in the game against Florida or even Alabama, I don't think he would have been overwhelmed by the situation just based on how he handled things. He looked ready for all this, and I think fans saw that. So once they saw that, it was okay. We feel good about this guy. He's certainly not a bust. He might be really, really good, and he might be really, really good right away next year. So I think that appeased the fan base, what little we saw of him. And I think a lot of fans will look at that and look at Josh Heupel and say, yeah, he really cares about his players. I think that matters to fans when a coach shows he cares about his players. My wife was impressed when Josh Heupel went out and looked at one of the lay down offensive linemen extra an extra point, showing that he cares about his guys that are hurt, even though they're faking an injury. But that matters to people. They want to think their coach is a caring guy and cares about his guys. So, yeah, I think it worked out well.
I had one of our very, very valuable KnoxNews readers, subscribers, messaged me. I get a few of these, but especially this guy said, I've never heard the theory that Tennessee is faking injuries on extra point kicks. When did this start? I've never heard this before. And I said, well, you must watch the game on TV. But I did, so because they're during a break, you don't see that. He said, no, I'm at every game. I'm a season ticket holder. And I asked him, I said, have you not noticed that Jackson Lampley has been injured every single game for 22 games in a row? And yet he is on the extra point kick 5 minutes later. You hadn't noticed that. And he said, well, now that you say it, he is down a lot. I do like how they diversified that a little bit this past game. Where I think Dane Davis has been quote unquote hurt on those before too. But this last game, Vyson Lang, I think, was injured. Addison Nichols was injured. Jackson Lampley, the veteran of those fake injuries, had to be sitting on the sideline thinking that's my guys, next generation. let's train them up.
I hope he puts that on his resume. Fake injury expert. That's his wheelhouse there. Specializes in fake sprained ankle.
Guys, one more thing on the quarterbacks. We spent so many episodes this season talking about, is Joe still the guy? Is there any chance Nico could replace him? Can we all agree now that with 3 games and a bowl game left over, that's sort of done? Joe's played pretty well lately. I think it's the best case scenario. Joe Milton is playing well when Nico comes out and also plays well. You sort of get the best of both worlds. That any question of Nico being the starter at some point, that's done, correct?
I think for the regular season, I would agree. The bowl game, it depends what Joe wants to do, I suppose. I don't, John and I were talking about this off air earlier. Would he opt out? I don't know. Sometimes guys that play in bowl games surprise me these days, and sometimes guys that opt out surprise me. I think you could make it depends on how you look at bowl games. Like, do you look at bowl games as a celebration of the season that was? If that's the case, then I think you want Milton out there. If you look at a bowl game as setting the stage for the following season, which is kind of what the Orange Bowl was last year, Milton took the reins for an injured Hendon Hooker, Squirrel White and company were out there. Then, Heupel's not going to do it. If Milton wants to play in the bowl, Heupel's absolutely going to start him, right? This is more a hypothetical scenario. What would be best for the program? I don't know. If Milton's heading off to the NFL, would it be the worst thing in the world if he opts out, gets ready for the draft, and Nico starts the bowl game? I think you could make that case that would be maybe best for the program. But Heupel's not going to do that as long as Milton wants to play in the bowl.
Well, the thing about it, Joe Milton has played his best ball in the last 3 games. The first half against Alabama, he was outstanding. Second half, he was just okay, but he didn't do anything awful. Then against Kentucky, I thought it was his most complete game, and he played well against UConn. Again, he's become very accurate, consistently accurate. So that's all you could ask of him. However, I do think, based on the way Nico played, if Joe Milton hadn't played, if Nico's showing those played well, I'm sorry. If Nico had shows those skills in practice and Joe Milton had struggled, maybe there could have been a quarterback change. And I'm speaking hypothetically, of course, but they wouldn't have hesitated to make the move to me because they didn't think Nico could handle it. From what I saw in Nico, I know in a very small sample size, I just saw great potential in him. So if you had to start him in a game or play him in a game, I wouldn't have been afraid to do so. I wouldn't have been afraid to give him a chance if the other guy wasn't playing effectively.
But to your point, Adam, yeah, the way Joe's played lately, it's the Joe show, and 2024 is the Nico show, and that's sort of what we were saying at the beginning of the season. I think John and I had our had our moments in the middle of the season where we were beginning to wonder, but then at the right time, Milton kind of answered that in those performances that John was talking about against Alabama, Kentucky, and then now UConn, for whatever that's worth. But the Kentucky game, to me, that was the one that's like, okay, this is Joe's thing to the finish line here. That was such an important, pivotal moment in the season. You lose to Kentucky, we look at this season differently, and he had his best performance probably of his career, for a full game. Yeah, he was great in the first half against Alabama, but wire to wire, he was what they needed against Kentucky, gave them the result they needed, and I think that kind of put things to bed.
Yeah, and Joe can certainly add to that if he plays well against Missouri, and for sure if he plays well and they have a chance of upsetting Georgia. I do like you mentioned 2024. I do like this like small celebrity status that Nico has within the Tennessee team. Today, McCallan Castles, he was the tight end that caught Nico's touchdown pass. He was telling everybody that the receiving gloves that he caught that first touchdown from Nico with, he had Nico autograph them. And his comment was, he said, one day when Nico's career is over, maybe I can have these hanging up on my wall at my house. So sort of, it sounds like maybe he's going to have it on eBay or something. If Nico ends up being Peyton Manning, he'll say, I have the first touchdown he ever threw.
Whose career lasts longer, Adam? Nico's or Coleman Castles?
That's a good question. Well, Castles is already thinking through, I think, maybe retirement, just in case Nico's career goes a long ways.
Yeah. I think that's a shrewd move on his part. He might be majoring in finance.
Yeah, I'd have Nico signing jerseys too. Have Milton sign a ball. Just everybody on the team, everybody come through and sign something for me and put it in a storage bin somewhere. Jalen Wright, here's some cleats. Sign them just in case you're a Pro Bowler one day.
John was bragging to me before we started recording, Adam, that he's got a signed ball from the St. Louis Cardinals 1964 World Series team. So John's one step ahead of us there. He was getting those autographs many moons ago. Good
and
on
I
you,
don't
John.
even know why somebody gave me that ball because I wasn't a Cardinals fan.
Yeah.
I'll take it
now, probably.
I'm not either, but I'll take it off your hands if need be.
Let's change gears, guys, to Missouri because this is a big moment for Tennessee. The game against Georgia the following week will be big, regardless, at Neyland Stadium, with a chance to kind of wreck Georgia's season. And depending on what would happen this week between Georgia and Ole Miss, possibly a chance for Tennessee to steal the East. But none of that comes into play so much depending on what happens this weekend. Like, yeah, Tennessee could still play spoiler against Georgia, but that game takes on a different life if Tennessee beats Missouri this weekend. And this game will also, I think, help determine the course of Tennessee's bowl direction. So, Adam, I know you've written a lot this year about different bowl possibilities for Tennessee, kind of looked into the crystal ball, tried to project things forward. I guess as I look through this, it's likely that either Georgia or Alabama goes to the college football playoff. The one that doesn't will almost certainly head to a New Year's Six bowl. If Ole Miss finishes 10-2, they could also wind up in a New Year's Six bowl. And then now LSU has another loss. They're 6-3. They're sort of trailing the pack. So to me, as I very unscientifically do this, it's possible that the Citrus Bowl could be on the line for the winner of Tennessee and Missouri. Adam, I'm curious, A, whether you agree with that assessment that the winner of this game moves into the driver's seat of the Citrus Bowl in Orlando, and B, do you think the fan base would be more excited about the Citrus Bowl as compared to the ReliaQuest Bowl in Tampa or the Gator Bowl in Jacksonville, or would their level of excitement not really change much just as long as it's a Florida Bowl game?
So let me lay out where Tennessee could go based on what happens first. Listeners, don't hold me to this 100% because, as Blake alluded to there's a lot of factors with other teams that could affect this, with what happens with the playoff and the SEC championship. There's a lot of factors that could affect this. But generally speaking, if Tennessee goes 8-4, I think they're probably Gator Bowl. This is how I'm making my travel plans now. I've got family calling and saying, "Hey, when are you going to be here for Christmas? What's the bowl situation?" So my best behind the scenes guess is this: 8-4, probably Gator Bowl. 9-3 record, probably ReliaQuest or Citrus Bowl. 10-2 record, Citrus Bowl, or a New Year's Six. That's just generally the range that I think we're probably looking at. So the difference between 8-4 and 9-3, potentially Gator or ReliaQuest / Citrus Bowl, is the difference in those is beating Missouri. I don't think you can count on upsetting number 1 Georgia at Neyland. It could happen. But if you beat Missouri, you're then looking at a 9-3 or 10-2. And 9-3 could potentially get you in the Citrus Bowl. But like you mentioned it there, it sort of depends a lot on Ole Miss. Does Ole Miss bump up to a New Year's Six Bowl, or do they drop down to the Citrus or to the Citrus Bowl? So it depends on how many get in. You could have some scenarios where the SEC does not get a team in the playoff. Then you'd have, Georgia and Alabama, let's say, in the New Year's Six. That would bump Ole Miss down to the Citrus Bowl, and so Tennessee would bump down to the ReliaQuest or Gator or whatever. But again, it depends so much on whether or not they beat Missouri. This is a toss-up game, obviously, for both teams. Missouri still has thoughts that they could have one of their better years in a long time, and Citrus Bowl for them would certainly be that. And so 9-3 is on the table for Tennessee, and they can do it by winning on the road. Does that matter to Tennessee fans? I don't think that. I think there's a division in Tennessee fans and SEC fans generally between Florida Bowls and other bowls, and then Florida Bowls and New Year's Six Bowls. Florida Bowls means you had a pretty good year. And to get there, you've got to finish at least 8-4, but certainly 9-3 would get you to any of those. So in that way, I think Tennessee fans see a difference because it points to the record that got you there. Now, the difference between going to Jacksonville or Tampa or Orlando, I think that's really just depends on individual fans. If for people that don't understand, Citrus obviously is the best of those three because that's the best team in the SEC that didn't go to the SEC, that didn't go to the CFP or a New Year's Six Bowl. Below that, there's supposed to be like 5 or 6 bowls that are all even, but they're really not even. The ReliaQuest in Tampa that used to be the Outback Bowl is seen as the best of those. It's a New Year's Day Bowl. The Gator, because it's still in Florida, is seen as the next best. And then you get some arguments after that if it's the Duke's Mayo Bowl or the Music City Bowl or whatever. But definitely the Florida Bowls are at the top, and Tennessee's in line to go to one of those. Winning this week would guarantee that.
I just hate the way all these bowls keep changing their names according to their sponsor. I remember the CarQuest Bowl, and now we have the ReliaQuest Bowl. And I think I think the CarQuest Bowl might have been another bowl in Miami, Fort Lauderdale area, wasn't it?
Where was the Poulan Weed Eater Bowl? Do you remember that one?
that was in Shreveport.
I saw today a projection that put Notre Dame into the Pop-Tarts Bowl. And I thought the prestige of Notre Dame mixed with the Pop-Tart Bowl. That's
but
I love
it's not the
Pop-Tarts.
Toastums Bowl.
Yeah. But do you really want to see your coach have mayonnaise poured over his head in the Duke's Mayo? I mean, come on. I was thinking about that. At first, I thought, well, Tennessee, it's a Florida Bowl. Like, it doesn't really matter that much. But then I thought Tennessee fans won't want to go to Jacksonville. Nothing against the city itself, but they associate going to a bowl game in Jacksonville with first Butch Jones, then when it was the Tax Slayer Bowl, and then with Jeremy Pruitt. In fact, you could argue that Jeremy Pruitt's finest hour might have been in the Gator Bowl when Tennessee made that epic comeback against Indiana. So
that game didn't happen, though. It did not happen. I looked in the media guide. There's no record of it. It did not occur.
Scrubbed from the annals of history. Yes. You spelled out the tiers of bowl games, Adam, and we know this because we have to, right? But I just think like John Q. SEC fan, if you were to give them a quiz and say which of these 3 bowls is the best bowl, the Citrus Bowl, the Gator Bowl, or I'm going to say now that it's called the ReliaQuest Bowl, a fan would not think it's the best. But let's say back when it was called the Outback, right? And if you would ask a fan, which is the best of these bowl games, a Citrus Bowl, the Gator Bowl, or the Outback Bowl? And I'm not trying to disparage fans by saying this. I'm just saying, like, I don't think people really care about this that much. Like, a Florida Bowl is a Florida Bowl. If it's not the New Year's Six, they're kind of all the same in prestige. And so we know that the Citrus Bowl is like one small step above the ReliaQuest and the Gator, but I'm not sure John Q fan knows that or cares about that. I think it comes down to, like, do you like Disney? If so, maybe you prefer the Citrus Bowl if you're going to go attend the game. Do you like the beach? Then maybe you prefer the Gator Bowl or the ReliaQuest Bowl in Jacksonville or Tampa.
Well, I mean, case in point, we can't decide what the name of the bowl is. You're saying ReliaQuest, and I'm saying ReliaQuest, and I don't even know which is correct.
I don't know which is right.
So, I mean, yeah, I mean, and that, by the way, if you did list those threes to John Q fan out there, they would say the ReliaQuest or whatever bowl is last because they've never heard of it.
Yeah,
and like you said, that's so much how this stuff changes. Yeah, it depends on where it is, when it is. I think most people, just a personal preference. The Citrus is a little different. It depends on maybe your age. The Citrus Bowl at one point, if you're looking back at the 90s, and Steve Spurrier used to make the joke, right? You can't spell citrus without UT. So that was a knock on the Citrus, going to the Citrus Bowl. But I think Tennessee fans to this point see the Citrus, they recognize mostly that the Citrus Bowl is above those others because it does have an old name. It's a name that's been around for quite a while. And I think that does matter. I mean, with the Capital One Bowl or whatever, how we used to call it, I would have to do a double take. Is that a really good bowl or not? You say the Peach Bowl. Oh, well, the Peach Bowl, sure, that's been around forever. It's the name of a fruit, which means it's a really good bowl. So I think people really look at it that way. I mean, if Tennessee went 10-2 and got into the mix for a New Year's Six Bowl, they would go to probably the Peach or the Cotton. Everybody would know those are better bowls because they've heard of them their entire lives. Nobody's heard of the ReliaQuest Bowl. The Gator Bowl, they kind of have. So it's sort of a toss-up, I guess.
Yeah, I think, the Gator Bowl to me is, I mean, you go back, you used to have the big four bowls, rose, cotton, orange, and sugar. And the Gator Bowl was just right below that. I mean, the Gator Bowl's been around forever. I really think it hurt the Gator Bowl when it had different names, when it became the Tax Slayer Bowl. I think it, because the Gator Bowl itself is an established long-time bowl, but I think it hurt that. Is the Gator Bowl, is that on New Year's Day this year?
No, it's the Gator Bowl is on the 29th. The Citrus and ReliaQuest are both on New Year's Day. So there's a difference right there. They're actually played about the same time. One of them's at 1:00 and one of them is at noon on New Year's, which, by the way, that's what I'm rooting for, because get away from Christmas, but then a lunchtime game, that's thinking of just my deadline and everything else and travel. And that's what most people do. They root for whatever works best for them. So
it's all about you, Adam.
Absolutely. I think every player, every fan, everybody will look at it and say, well, which one is the date that I want and the time that I want? The worst bowl that I ever covered was the GoDaddy.com Bowl. That was in Mobile on like January 8th, I think.
Ooh.
It was like a week after the best bowls, when everybody else thought it was only basketball season, and I'm covering a bowl game in Mobile that nobody's ever heard of.
This matchup, guys, we've talked about how important it is, and not only will determine the bowl direction, I think maybe even more importantly, determines the perception of the season. One game can swing the perception of a season quite a bit. 9-3 versus 8-4. If we're penciling in, we're not writing it in ink, but we're penciling in a loss to Georgia. This could be the difference between 9-3 and 8-4. I think there is a significant change in perspective on that type of year. But I mean, Missouri, we may remember Tennessee just running over Missouri the last couple of years. This is a much different Missouri team. They played Georgia tough on Saturday. Their quarterback, Brady Cooks, played well most of the year. He had his worst game of the year against Georgia. That might have said something about the opponent, the situation. They got a good running back in Cody Schrader. They got a good wide receiver, Luther Burden. Their defense is decent. To me, this feels like a coin flip game, and it's in Columbia. So, we talked about those road narratives before. Tennessee put a pin in that by winning at Lexington, but they could come storming back here on Saturday. So, I guess in closing thoughts, how do you guys see this one? The sports books see it as a toss-up. They got Tennessee as a 1.5-point favorite. Is that sort of the way you're looking at it, kind of on a razor's edge, or what's your outlook?
Yeah, I am. Tennessee 2 years ago hung 62 on Missouri. Last year they hung 66 on Missouri. If they can get to half of one of those scores, it'll be a really good day. Because Missouri is good on both sides of the ball. They're very balanced on offense. I saw some of the response from the Missouri's loss to Georgia as sort of like, well, told you Missouri wasn't for real. I actually took it the opposite. I looked at that game and said, oh, whoa, yeah, Missouri's for real, because they were toe-to-toe with Georgia for quite a while there. I think Tennessee's going to be okay. They may be good offensively, but they'll at least be, I think, okay offensively. They can run the ball against most teams, and I think they'll run the ball fine. We'll see if we get like okay Joe Milton or really good Joe Milton. Who knows? But the offense is going to be fine. The defense, they have to be good with the pass rush, and they have to be good with the pass rush up the middle of the line. They've got some guys on the edge. James Pierce has been good off the edge. Tyler Barron has made himself a lot of money in terms of the draft coming off the edge. But they've got to have a rush up the middle, whether or not that's Omar Norman Lott or Omari Thomas, or maybe that's a linebacker. They've got to get a push up the middle, because Brady Cook not only is good at sitting in the pocket and moving up in the pocket to throw the ball if you've got rushers off the edge, but he's also good if rushers are coming off the edge to step up and run the ball. He's very mobile. He's really good on his feet. You've got to get people in his face, and so they're going to have to push the middle of the line. If Tennessee can get a pass rush and make him a little uncomfortable, Tennessee secondary won't be exposed, and they can win the game. If Brady Cook is comfortable in there and you don't give him a rush everywhere on the line, then he's gonna pick apart that secondary. Tennessee's gonna lose. I think if I had to pick one thing that determines whether or not Tennessee wins this game, it's how good its pass rush will be.
Yeah, and related to that, Missouri with Brady Cook been very effective this year, throwing those back shoulder pass plays to receivers and get one-on-one situation. And Brady Cook has not been hesitant to throw it in pretty tight coverage, thinking his guy, particularly when it's Luther Burden, the acclaimed wide receiver, when it's his guy one-on-one, he's not afraid to make that pass in close quarters. So Tennessee's going to need to cover well. And of course, having a pass rush factors into that. One thing I wonder about this game from a quarterback standpoint is Brady Cook has been really consistent pretty much all year. That wasn't the case last year. And I think a lot of Missouri fans were wondering, who else can we get at quarterback? Sam Horn was a celebrated recruit. I think it just didn't look like Brady Cook was perceived as the quarterback. He's got the job locked up. He'll be the guy. It wasn't that way. And he had a really bad fourth quarter against Georgia. And particularly one pass that he threw never should have been thrown. And now Stackhouse, one of those mammoth defensive linemen of Georgia's, didn't pick it up, caught it before they hit the ground and rambled down the field with it. I just wonder if that might affect Brady Cook, because he's going to be he can't be lacking in confidence in this game. And I wonder if that could be a factor.
John, I do like that observation of Brady Cook throwing back shoulder throws, because against what type of defenses, what type of secondaries do you want to throw back passes? It's against corners that don't turn around to look at the ball, and it's against cautious safeties that are hanging back too far. Tennessee has very cautious safeties. They're coached to be cautious, and Tennessee's corners don't turn around and look at the ball. And so that's a bad matchup in terms of Tennessee, and that's something where they have to look at film, know that's coming, and say, we've got to play a little differently.
When you were quarterbacking in high school, did you like that back shoulder throw?
I liked any throw that would keep me from being on my back. So once they were coming, I threw it as high and as far as I could, which was not very high and not very far. Did not get sacked. Somebody caught it. It sometimes was on the other team, but did not take that sack.
Jeremy Pruitt, he borrowed this from Nick Saban. He said he liked drives that ended in a kick, either an extra point, a field goal, or a punt. Adam, it sounds like you liked pass attempts that ended with the ball in somebody's hands that wasn't yours.
You don't let the ball touch the ground was my philosophy. I did get kicked in the head a few times, usually when they would pick it off and be running the other way and somebody would step on me. But that's, yeah. Never let the ball touch the ground. Somebody's got to catch it.
All right, well, happy trails to Adam. He's off to Columbia this weekend. It's not an easy place to get to from Knoxville, but he will have all the coverage for Knox News. You can also check out John's commentary, of course, and we will be back with you next week. Thanks for listening to the Volunteer State.